His assistant flashed a triumphant smile as she accidentally destroyed my presentation files. "Oops, looks like someone forgot to back up their work," she whispered, just loud enough for me to hear. "Don't worry, James prefers when I handle the big presentations anyway." I walked into that boardroom the next morning with emergency backup slides and unwavering confidence. 6 months later, I'm signing her performance review as the new CEO, while she desperately tries to explain why quarterly reports are missing. "Perhaps you forgot to back up your work?" I suggest with a smile. The executive floor can be quite competitive. Before I continue my story about reclaiming my birthright and professional dignity, I want to thank you for joining me on this journey of resilience and justice. If stories about standing your ground and fighting back against betrayal speak to you, consider subscribing. It's completely free, and tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Now, let's dive in. The memory of that presentation sabotage burned brighter than the screen of my laptop as I sat in my home office at 3 a.m., scrolling through financial reports that didn't add up. I'd been poring over these numbers for weeks, unable to shake the feeling that something was fundamentally wrong at Meridian Tech, the company my grandfather had built from a garage invention into a cornerstone of American innovation. My name is Olivia Bennett. 5 years ago, I was the director of product development at Meridian Technologies, the company my grandfather William Bennett founded in 1978. My entire childhood was spent watching him transform a simple circuit board innovation into a tech empire that employed thousands. Grandpa Bill believed in two things: cutting-edge innovation and treating employees like family. His office door was always open, and he knew every employee's birthday. When I graduated with my engineering degree, Grandpa insisted I start in product testing, not management. "Respect is earned from the ground up, Liv," he told me, his voice gravelly from years of pitching ideas to investors. I spent my 20s learning every department, from manufacturing to marketing. The employees didn't respect me because I was a Bennett. They respected me because I could troubleshoot assembly line issues at 2 a.m. and still lead the 8 a.m. strategy meeting. By 30, I was directing our most profitable division, and Meridian was thriving. That's when James Morgan joined our executive team as Chief Marketing Officer. Where I was analytical and detail-oriented, James was charismatic and visionary. He could charm potential clients with ease and painted pictures of technological futures so compelling that investors practically threw money at us. "You see the trees? I see the forest," he told me on our second date, after a company gala where we'd finally acknowledged the chemistry that had been building for months. Together, we could build something extraordinary. I believed him. I fell for the vision of us as partners in life and business. When he proposed a year later, it felt like destiny. The Bennett legacy would continue, strengthened by our complementary skills. Grandpa, who'd stepped back to Chairman Emeritus by then, gave his blessing before passing away peacefully 3 months after our wedding. The grief hit me hard. James suggested I take temporary leave from my directorship. "Just a few months? To process everything," he said, holding me as I cried. "The company isn't going anywhere, and you need time." A few months turned into a year. I threw myself into organizing Grandpa's papers, establishing a foundation in his name, anything, to process the loss of the man who'd been my mentor and hero. During that time, James stepped up, taking on additional responsibilities at Meridian. The board was impressed with his leadership, and I was grateful for his support. When I returned part-time, subtle changes were evident. My office had been relocated to a different floor. My team now reported to a new director who'd been hired during my absence. "Just temporary restructuring," James assured me. "Let's focus on getting you back in the groove before making any changes." I accepted this explanation, diving into a special project James suggested, exploring potential international partnerships that would require extensive travel. It kept me busy, but increasingly disconnected from day-to-day operations at Meridian. More changes followed. each seemingly logical in isolation but forming a pattern I was too distracted to recognize. The company newsletter dropped my grandfather's quote about innovation with integrity from its masthead. The annual company picnic moved from the local park where Grandpa had flipped burgers himself to an exclusive country club. The profit-sharing program for long-term employees was replaced with a more modern bonus structure that heavily favored executive management. 3 years after Grandpa's death, I visited headquarters to present my findings on international expansion. The receptionist, someone I'd never met, asked me to wait while she called upstairs for a visitor pass. When I mentioned I was Olivia Bennett, she looked blankly at me. "Bennett? Are you with the foundation?" That evening, I confronted James. Over dinner. The receptionist didn't even know who I am. Employees who've been there less than 3 years have no idea I'm a Bennett. James barely looked up from his phone. "The company's grown exponentially, Liv. We've hired hundreds of new people. You can't expect everyone to know the family history." "Family history? My grandfather's name is on the building." "It's just business evolution," he replied. "Nothing personal." But it was personal. Each subsequent visit revealed another piece of my grandfather's legacy systematically dismantled. The innovation lab he'd personally designed was now sleek, sterile, and devoid of the collaborative chaos that had sparked our best products. The wall displaying employee patents had been replaced with stock tickers. The mentorship program for young engineers, Grandpa's pride and joy, had been quietly defunded. Last Christmas, when Meridian excluded retired employees from the holiday party for the first time in company history, something inside me broke. I drove to visit Eleanor Thompson, my grandfather's original electrical engineer and my honorary aunt. At 78, she was still sharp as a tack, continuing to consult on special projects until her invitation to the company stopped coming 6 months ago. "He's gutting everything Bill built," I whispered, accepting the tea she pressed into my hands. "Meridian doesn't feel like ours anymore." Eleanor studied me over her reading glasses. "So what are you going to do about it, Olivia Bennett? You're Bill's granddaughter. He didn't raise you to whine. He raised you to solve problems." Her words hit me like a splash of cold water. For years, I'd been so focused on my grief, then on being a supportive wife, that I'd allowed James to systematically push me to the periphery of my own family company. I'd been traveling the world chasing partnerships while the real partnership, the one with my husband, the one with the company, was disintegrating. "I need to know what's really happening at Meridian," I said finally. Eleanor smiled for the first time that evening. "Now you're thinking like a Bennett." What followed was weeks of quiet investigation. Eleanor connected me with retired executives who shared disturbing patterns they'd observed before their early retirement packages were offered. I reached out to college friends who now worked in finance, asking hypothetical questions about company valuation strategies and acquisition patterns. I discovered James had been systematically replacing board members loyal to my grandfather's vision with his own allies. The international partnerships I'd been researching weren't meant to expand Meridian. They were vehicles to move intellectual property offshore where it could be leveraged differently, away from employee profit-sharing obligations. Most disturbingly, I found evidence suggesting James was preparing the company for acquisition by Vertex Technologies, our largest competitor, a move that would likely result in massive layoffs and the end of Meridian as an independent entity. What I didn't expect to discover was Ashley Wilson, the executive assistant James had hired 2 years ago. 26, with an MBA from a prestigious university and ambition that radiated from her perfect LinkedIn profile. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. She'd been rapidly promoted to Chief of Staff, a position created specifically for her. Her signature appeared on documents she shouldn't have had authority to sign. Her name was listed as co-presenter on James's most important pitches. I might, have continued my investigation in quiet indefinitely, carefully building my case, if not for the quarterly strategy meeting last month. The meeting I was technically still invited to, though my input had been increasingly ignored over the past year. I prepared diligently, analyzing product pipeline data and identifying critical issues with the direction James was taking the company. Our core competency in custom semiconductor solutions was being neglected in favor of flashier consumer products, with lower margins. I compiled my findings into a comprehensive presentation, ready to reassert my voice in the company my grandfather built. The morning of the meeting, I arrived early to upload my slides to the conference room system. Ashley was already there, wearing a dress that cost more than what our assembly line workers made in a month. "Olivia, what a surprise," she said, her smile not reaching her eyes. "I didn't realize you'd be joining us today." "I'm still Director of International Partnerships, Ashley," I replied evenly. "This is a strategy meeting. Strategy is part of partnerships." "Of course. How silly of me. Let me help you with those files." She took my flash drive, plugged it into the laptop connected to the projection system, and made a show of uploading my presentation. As she worked, her phone buzzed with an incoming text. She glanced at it, smiled in a way I recognized all too well. Intimate, conspiratorial, and quickly typed a response. The sender's name was visible for just a moment. James. When board members began arriving, Ashley announced a small technical issue with the presentation system. "Nothing to worry about. I've got IT working on it. In the meantime, James has prepared a comprehensive overview that covers all departments." By the time the system was fixed, James had presented for 40 minutes, leaving barely 10 minutes for my carefully prepared analysis. When I finally connected my backup tablet to the system, I'd learned long ago to always have redundancies. I noticed key slides were corrupted or missing. As I struggled to reconstruct my points, Ashley leaned over and whispered, "Oops, looks like someone forgot to back up their work. Don't worry. James prefers when I handle the big presentations anyway." The proprietary tone, the casual mention of preferences, suddenly everything clicked into place. The late nights at the office, the unexplained weekend emergency meetings, the subtle distance that had grown between James and me over the past year. I made it through the presentation on professionalism and muscle memory alone, my mind racing with implications both personal and professional. After the meeting, I watched from across the atrium as James and Ashley left together, his hand resting just a moment too long on the small of her back as they entered the elevator. That night, James came home later than usual, smelling of unfamiliar perfume and full of excuses about a client dinner. I said nothing about my suspicions or discoveries. Instead, I asked an innocent question about Vertex Technologies, the competitor I suspected he was preparing to sell to. "They've been making interesting moves lately. Do you ever talk with their executive team?" James's reaction was subtle but telling, a slight stiffening, a carefully composed expression. "Occasionally at industry events. Nothing significant. Why do you ask?" "Just curious. Their new consumer line seems to be following a strategy similar to what you presented today." "Great minds think alike, I guess," he said with a forced laugh, quickly changing the subject. Over the next 2 weeks, I executed a careful plan. First, I contacted our family attorney, the man who had handled my grandfather's affairs for 30 years, and who still managed the Bennett Family Trust, which, I discovered, still held 22% of Meridian's shares. Though I had allowed James to vote my shares by proxy in recent years, the actual ownership remained with me. Second, I reached out to Samuel Chen, my grandfather's protege, who had left Meridian shortly after James took greater control. Now running his own successful startup, Sam still held 5% of Meridian shares and harbored deep loyalty to my grandfather's memory. "I've been waiting for this call for 2 years," Sam told me over coffee at a cafe far from Meridian's campus. "Your grandfather would be proud you're finally waking up." Third, I connected with Diane Rivera, our former chief financial officer who had retired after raising questions about the restructuring of our R&D investments. Diane had maintained her 3% ownership and, more importantly, had kept meticulous notes about financial decisions that didn't align with company bylaws. Most critically, I discovered my grandfather had inserted a special provision in Meridian's charter, the Bennett provision, as the original board had called it, that gave founding family members expanded voting rights if they could demonstrate actions contrary to the company's established mission and values. With the Bennett Family Trust, my personal shares, and allies like Sam and Diane, I controlled or influenced 34% of voting shares. The provision would amplify that to effective control if I could prove James was acting against company interests. The morning of the emergency board meeting, James had called to vote on the Vertex acquisition proposal. I dressed with deliberate care. A charcoal suit my grandfather had bought me when I graduated with my MBA. A simple silver necklace he'd given me on my 16th birthday. Artifacts of the Bennett legacy I was fighting to preserve. I arrived early, nodding to security guards who still remembered me from my more active days. Instead of heading to the main boardroom, I went to the executive suite, finding James's office door ajar. Inside, he and Ashley were in the middle of what appeared to be an intimate conversation, her perched on his desk in a way no professional assistant would sit with her boss. "The board vote is just a formality," James was saying. "With the proxy votes and the presentation we've prepared, they'll approve the Vertex deal unanimously. By this time next month, we'll be announced as vice presidents in the merged company, and that retention bonus will buy us that house in Malibu you've been eyeing." "What about Olivia?" Ashley asked, her voice containing no concern, just practical planning. "Once the deal is done, it won't matter. The prenup protects my shares and compensation. She's been so disconnected from the company for years, she won't even understand what happened until it's over. By then, we'll be celebrating in Malibu." I cleared my throat from the doorway. I wouldn't book those plane tickets just yet. The look of shock on their faces would have been comical under different circumstances. James recovered first, shifting immediately to damage control. "Liv, this isn't what it looks like. It looks exactly like the CFO of Meridian Technologies, conspiring with his assistant to sell the company against shareholder interests while planning to leave his wife. Did I miss anything?" My voice was steady, calmer than I felt. Ashley slid off the desk, straightening her skirt. "I should go prepare for the board meeting." "Stay right where you are," I said, not unkindly, but with unmistakable authority. "This concerns you too." James's expression hardened. "Whatever you think you know, the board vote is happening in 30 minutes. I have proxy rights to your shares. The presentation is ready, and the votes are lined up. If you're planning some kind of scene, it will only embarrass you." I smiled then, feeling a strange sense of calm. "You've been so busy managing your affair and your backroom deal with Vertex that you've overlooked some key details, like checking who actually controls the Bennett Family Trust shares, or keeping track of what former executives like Sam Chen and Diane Rivera think about your leadership." Uncertainty flickered across his face for the first time. "The board meeting is indeed happening in 30 minutes, I continued. "And yes, there will be a vote about Meridian's future, but it won't be the vote you're expecting." James followed me to the boardroom, Ashley trailing behind. Inside, board members were already gathered, along with faces James clearly didn't expect. Sam, Diane, and Eleanor Thompson, my grandfather's original engineer, now representing the retired employees' interests. "What is this?" James demanded as we entered. Board Chairman Robert Weiss, who had worked with my grandfather for decades before retiring to this ceremonial role, gestured to the empty seats. "James, Olivia, please join us. It seems we have some unexpected business to address before the acquisition proposal." As we took our seats, I placed a thick folder on the table. "Before we proceed with any vote about Meridian's future, I'm invoking the Bennett provision of the corporate charter." Several board members, the newer ones James had appointed, looked confused. The older members sat up straighter. That provision hasn't been invoked in the company's history, Robert noted, though I detected a hint of satisfaction in his tone. For those unfamiliar, I explained, opening the charter to the marked page, the Bennett provision allows founding family members to call for a comprehensive leadership review and special voting structure if they can demonstrate actions taken that fundamentally contradict the company's established mission and values. James scoffed. This is ridiculous. Olivia has been barely involved in day-to-day operations for years. She's upset about personal matters and trying to hijack a critical business decision. Actually, Sam Chen interjected, sliding forward, a stack of documents. We have extensively documented how current leadership has systematically dismantled the core principles that built Meridian Technologies. From the elimination of the employee profit-sharing program to the offshoring of intellectual property to reduce tax obligations. Diane Rivera picked up the thread. The proposed Vertex acquisition would result in estimated layoffs of 78% of current employees within 18 months, based on their previous acquisition patterns. This directly contradicts Meridian's founding commitment to employee stability and community investment. For the next 20 minutes, we presented evidence not just of James's personal indiscretions, though Ashley squirmed visibly when their relationship was clinically documented as a conflict of interest, but of a systematic betrayal of everything Meridian Technologies stood for. Under the Bennett provision, I concluded, I'm calling for an immediate vote on company leadership before any acquisition discussions can proceed. As the charter specifies, founding family shares receive triple voting weight on matters of leadership and company direction. James leaned forward, his knuckles white as he gripped the table edge. You can't possibly have enough shares to override the rest of the board, even with this archaic provision. With the Bennett Trust shares, my personal holdings, and allied shareholders, I replied calmly, we control 34% of outstanding shares. With the provision's triple weighting on the family portions, that translates to effective control for this specific vote. The actual voting process took less than 10 minutes. When it concluded, James was removed as CEO, pending a full investigation into the Vertex negotiations and potential breaches of fiduciary duty. I was appointed interim CEO, with Sam Chen returning as Chief Operating Officer. As security waited to escort James from the building, a precaution suggested by our legal team given the sensitive nature of the allegations, he made one last attempt to regain control. This company has outgrown the Bennett fairy tale, he spat. You can't run a modern technology firm on outdated sentimentality about employee picnics and mentorship programs. The market will punish this decision. The market has already been punishing us, I countered, projecting a chart showing Meridian's declining innovation output and increasing employee turnover under his leadership. We became successful because my grandfather understood that technology is created by people, not spreadsheets. We're not returning to the past, James. We're reclaiming our future. As James was escorted out, Ashley lingered uncertainly by the door. Ms. Wilson, I called out, please don't leave yet. We'll need to discuss your role going forward. The fear in her eyes was palpable. Am I being terminated? I considered the young woman who had participated in undermining my grandfather's legacy and my marriage, who had whispered, "Oops, looks like someone forgot to back up their work," with such smug confidence just weeks ago. Meridian doesn't casually discard people, Ms. Wilson. That was my grandfather's policy, and it remains mine. However, your position as Chief of Staff is being eliminated effective immediately. Relief flickered across her face, quickly replaced by wariness. Then what? You have an MBA from a respected institution and clearly possess ambition. Those are valuable qualities when properly directed. You'll be reassigned to our manufacturing division in Detroit. 1 year working directly with the people who build our products will give you perspective that no business school can teach. After that, we can discuss your future at Meridian, if you choose to stay. Ashley's mouth opened and closed, but no argument emerged. Finally, she managed a stiff nod. "When do I start?" "Eleanor will show you to HR for processing." I nodded toward my grandfather's former engineer, who approached with a surprisingly sympathetic smile. "Come along, dear," Eleanor said, guiding Ashley toward the door. I started in assembly myself back in 1982. Best education I ever got. The months that followed were among the most challenging of my life. Unwinding James's corporate maneuvers while rebuilding company culture required 16-hour days. The divorce proceedings dragged on as James fought for an ownership stake he hadn't earned. Industry analysts questioned whether a sentimental heir could navigate modern technology markets. Yet, beneath the chaos, something remarkable happened. As we reinstated the mentorship program and reconnected with retired innovators, new product ideas began flowing again. When we restored the profit-sharing program, employee retention stabilized for the first time in years. The Bennett Foundation Scholarship Fund started sending us promising young engineers who craved both technical challenges and ethical leadership. 6 months to the day after that board meeting, I sat in the CEO office that had once been my grandfather's, reviewing quarterly reports. A knock at the door interrupted my concentration. "Your 2 o'clock is here, Ms. Bennett," my assistant announced. Ashley Wilson entered, her appearance markedly changed from our last encounter. Gone were the designer clothes and perfect manicure, replaced by practical business attire and a simpler presentation. The confidence remained, but it seemed grounded in something more substantial than ambition alone. "Thank you for seeing me," she said, taking the offered seat across from me. "Your supervisor in Detroit speaks highly of your contributions," I noted, reviewing her file. "Says you've demonstrated exceptional problem-solving skills and a surprising aptitude for process improvement." Ashley nodded, a flicker of pride crossing her face. "The assembly line team taught me more in 6 months than I learned in 2 years of business school. They're remarkable people." "They are indeed. Which brings us to the purpose of this meeting. Your reassignment period is ending, and we need to discuss next steps." She straightened in her chair. "I'd like to request a permanent position in operations management. I've prepared a proposal for efficiency improvements that could reduce waste by 12% while improving working conditions for line employees." I studied the young woman before me, still ambitious, still driven, but now with an understanding of what actually made Meridian special. The transformation was precisely what my grandfather would have hoped for. "I have a counter-proposal," I said, sliding a folder across the desk. "We're reinstating the Associate Innovation Director program," my grandfather started. 6 promising employees rotate through all major departments over 2 years, developing a holistic understanding of our business while contributing fresh perspectives. One of those positions could be yours. Ashley stared at the folder, visibly processing the opportunity. "Why would you offer this to me after everything?" I considered the question carefully. Because Meridian isn't about punishment or revenge. It's about building something that lasts, something bigger than any individual. My grandfather understood that people can change when given the right environment. The question is, have you? "I have," she said quietly. Then with more conviction, "I have. Detroit showed me what real value creation looks like. It's not manipulating stock prices or engineering acquisitions. It's creating something people need, with people who care about their work." I nodded, satisfied with her answer. "The program starts next month. Eleanor Thompson will be one of your mentors." As Ashley left my office, I turned toward the window overlooking the manufacturing campus my grandfather had built. The company wasn't perfect. We faced significant challenges in an increasingly competitive market. But we were building on a foundation of integrity again, creating technology that served humanity, rather than merely extracting value from it. My phone buzzed with a text from Sam. "Board approved the expanded R&D budget. New engineering hiring starts next week. Bill would be proud." He would be proud, I thought. not just of the company's direction, but of his granddaughter who had finally claimed her place in it. Not as an entitlement of birth, but as the culmination of lessons learned through loss, betrayal, and ultimately, renewal. The plaque on my desk, one of the few items I'd brought into this office, contained my grandfather's favorite saying, "We build circuits, but we invest in people." After years of detours, Meridian Technologies was back on course, guided by the principles of its founder but adapted for a new era. As for me, Olivia Bennett, I was finally home. When I finally connected my backup tablet to the system, I discovered key slides were corrupted or missing entirely. The data I'd meticulously compiled on declining innovation metrics and questionable financial allocations had vanished, leaving me with little more than introduction slides and conclusion points. Ashley hovered nearby, her perfect posture radiating satisfaction as I struggled to reconstruct my arguments from memory. "Technical difficulties are so frustrating, aren't they?" she whispered, just loud enough for me to hear. Good thing James's presentation covered everything the board really needs to know. I maintained my composure through sheer determination, presenting what remained of my work with as much authority as I could muster. The board members, most of them James's recent appointees, listened with polite disinterest, checking watches and phones as I spoke. Only Robert Weiss, the aging chairman who had worked alongside my grandfather for decades, seemed genuinely attentive, his bushy eyebrows furrowing at several of my points about the shift away from our core technologies. Afterward, as executives filtered out of the boardroom, Robert lingered, waiting until we were alone before speaking. "That was quite different from the quarterly reports your grandfather used to give," he said, his voice carrying the slight tremor of age, but none of the mental decline James had hinted at when suggesting Robert might soon need to be replaced. "The company is quite different now," I replied carefully, unsure where his loyalties lay after years of working alongside James. Robert nodded, eyes sharp beneath those impressive eyebrows. "Indeed it is. Bill always said a company was its people first, its products second, and its profits third. Seems the order has been reversed these days." He glanced toward the door, then lowered his voice. "Your technical difficulties today were rather convenient for some, wouldn't you say?" My breath caught. "You noticed that?" "I've been in corporate governance for 47 years, Olivia. I notice most things, including how systematically your influence has been minimized." He gathered his leather portfolio, moving toward the door with careful steps. "Your grandfather kept certain documents in a safe deposit box at First Meridian Bank. Said they were insurance for the company's soul, whatever that meant. Thought you should know?" He left me standing alone in the boardroom, mind racing with implications. First Meridian Bank had been Grandpa's personal bank since before the company existed. If he'd secured documents there, they'd been deliberately kept separate from company records, and likely from James's knowledge. I exited through a side corridor to avoid James's post-meeting debriefing, which had become little more than a performance designed to showcase his leadership to remaining board members. In the elevator, I checked my phone to find 3 missed calls from James and a text asking where I'd disappeared to. I ignored them, heading straight to the parking garage. As I approached my car, I spotted Ashley leaning against a sleek black Tesla parked in the adjacent space, James's Tesla, which I'd helped choose as his anniversary gift last year. She was typing on her phone with rapid precision, her expression reflecting none of the professional deference she typically displayed in office settings. I slowed my pace, partially concealed by a concrete column, and watched as James emerged from the executive elevator moments later. Without hesitation, he approached Ashley, his hand sliding around her waist with practiced familiarity before he kissed her. Not a furtive, guilty kiss, but the comfortable greeting of established lovers. "Did she suspect anything?" Ashley asked as they separated, her hand still resting on his chest. James laughed, the sound echoing harshly in the concrete structure. "Olivia?" She was too busy trying to salvage her little presentation. Besides, she's been oblivious for years. Why would today be different? I retreated silently, taking the stairs instead of returning to the elevator. The confirmation of their affair was almost secondary to the realization that they both viewed me with such dismissive contempt. I wasn't just a wife being betrayed, but a strategic obstacle being systematically neutralized. Back in my car, parked on a different level, I sat motionless, processing everything I'd witnessed. The personal betrayal stung, certainly, but it was eclipsed by the professional implications. If James and Ashley were so confident in their ability to undermine me at a board meeting, what else had they done? What were they planning? Robert's cryptic message about Grandpa's safe deposit box suddenly seemed urgently important. I started the car and drove directly to First Meridian Bank. The bank's main branch occupied a stately stone building downtown, its architecture reflecting the institution's 100-year history in the community. Inside, the marble floors and wood-paneled walls created an atmosphere of solidity and permanence, qualities Grandpa had always valued. At the customer service desk, a young woman with a nameplate reading Heather greeted me pleasantly. "I need to access a safe deposit box registered to William Bennett," I explained, producing my driver's license. "I'm his granddaughter and executor." Heather's professional smile faltered slightly. "Let me check our records, Ms. Bennett. This might take a moment." She disappeared into a back office, returning several minutes later with an older gentleman in a precisely tailored suit. "Ms. Bennett, I'm Thomas Blackwell, the branch manager," he said, extending his hand. "If you'll come with me to my office, we can discuss your grandfather's arrangements privately." Blackwell's office was a shrine to banking tradition, leather-bound. Ledgers displayed on bookshelves, framed black and white photographs of the bank's founding, a heavy wooden desk polished to a high sheen. He gestured for me to sit in one of the visitor chairs. "Your grandfather was one of our most valued clients for over 40 years, he began, folding his hands on the desk. When he set up his final arrangements, he left specific instructions regarding the safe deposit box you're inquiring about." "What kind of instructions?" I asked, an uneasy feeling growing. "The contents are accessible only to you, but with certain conditions." Blackwell unlocked a desk drawer and removed a sealed envelope with my name handwritten on the front, in Grandpa's distinctive script. He instructed us to provide this letter before granting access. I accepted the envelope with trembling fingers, breaking the seal to reveal a single sheet of Meridian Technology's letterhead from the company's original design. Navy blue with the stylized M Grandpa had sketched himself. "My dearest Olivia, if you're reading this, you've recognized that something at Meridian needs correction. I always hoped this letter would remain unread, that the safeguards I built into the company would be sufficient. But I've lived long enough to know that what one generation builds, another can dismantle if vigilance falters. The safe deposit box contains 3 things: the original company charter with provisions that aren't in the digitized versions, documentation of the Bennett Family Trust's true holdings, and a letter to Robert Weiss that I trust you'll deliver if necessary. Meridian was never meant to be merely profitable, Liv. It was meant to be meaningful, to create technology that matters while treating the people who create it with dignity. If that vision is threatened, these documents provide the legal foundation to restore it. Remember what I always told you. Technology without humanity is just expensive garbage. Reclaim the humanity if it's been lost. All my love and confidence, Grandpa." I folded the letter carefully, tucking it into my jacket pocket. "I'd like to access the box now, please." Blackwell nodded, seemingly relieved. "Of course, if you'll follow me to the vault." The safe deposit box was smaller than I'd expected, just a standard-sized metal rectangle in a wall of identical containers. But the documents inside would prove more valuable than their modest housing suggested. Working methodically, I photographed each page with my phone before returning the originals to the box. I wouldn't remove them yet. Not until I had a secure place to keep them and a clear plan for their use. One never knew when bank access might be mysteriously restricted once James realized I was investigating. The contents confirmed everything Robert had implied and more. The original charter included a founder's integrity clause that could be invoked by any Bennett family member who held shares if they could demonstrate actions contrary to the company's core principles with the support of at least 25% of shareholders. Once invoked, it triggered a special voting structure that gave founding family shares treble weight on matters of corporate governance and strategic direction. More surprising was the document detailing the Bennett family trust holdings. While I knew the trust controlled significant Meridian shares, the actual percentage was nearly double what appeared in current company records, 27% rather than the 15% that had been reported to me as trustee for the past 3 years. Someone had been systematically underreporting the trust's holdings, diluting my perceived ownership while maintaining actual control of those shares. The third document was a sealed letter addressed to Robert Weiss with a note on the envelope, to be delivered by Olivia when the time comes. I respected Grandpa's wishes, keeping it sealed for now. As I left the bank, my phone buzzed with texts from James. "Where are you? We have dinner with the Vertex executives tonight. Don't forget. Wear the blue dress they commented on last time. Be at Ravello by 7. Don't be late. This deal is important." Vertex executives, the company James had been positioning as a strategic partner, was now clearly the intended acquirer of Meridian, and I was expected to play the role of supportive wife while he negotiated the sale of my grandfather's legacy. I texted back, "Not feeling well. You go ahead without me." His response came quickly. "This is important, Olivia. Take something for whatever it is and be there." The commanding tone, the dismissal of my autonomy. How had I not seen this side of him before? Or had it developed gradually as his power within Meridian grew? Either way, I was done being the obedient corporate wife. I said, "I'm not coming. Handle it yourself. You and Ashley seem to have everything under control anyway." The typing indicator appeared and disappeared several times before his reply finally came through. "We'll discuss this when I get home." I didn't respond, instead driving to Eleanor Thompson's Victorian home in the historic district. The former chief engineer still maintained an office there, filled with prototypes and technical journals spanning decades of innovation. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Eleanor remarked as she ushered me into her cluttered living room, where engineering diagrams competed with family photos for wall space. "More like I've seen the truth," I replied, sinking into her worn leather sofa. "James and his assistant Ashley are having an affair, and they're planning to sell Meridian to Vertex Technologies. They sabotaged my presentation today to prevent me from raising concerns about the company's direction." Eleanor's expression remained calm, unsurprised. "I've been watching that young man hollow out Bill's company for 3 years. The affair doesn't shock me, and the Vertex deal has been rumored among retirees for months. The question is, what are you going to do about it?" I showed her the photos of Grandpa's documents, explaining the founder's integrity clause and the discrepancy in the trust's holdings. "Bill always was clever," she said, studying the charter provisions through her reading glasses. "He built escape hatches into everything he designed, mechanical or organizational. But executing this will require more than legal documents. You'll need allies, evidence, and impeccable timing." "That's why I'm here," I admitted. "I need your help." Eleanor set the papers aside and leaned forward, her posture straightening as it always did when approaching a complex engineering problem. "Well then, let's get to work." Over the next 3 hours, we developed a methodical plan that would have made Grandpa proud. Eleanor would reach out to the network of retired Meridian executives who had been pushed aside during James's tenure, many of whom still held shares and harbored significant resentment about the company's direction. I would connect with current employees who remained loyal to Grandpa's vision but had been silenced or marginalized. Most importantly, we needed to document the full extent of James's planned Vertex deal before the next board meeting, where he would undoubtedly push for approval. Samuel Chen would be your strongest ally, Eleanor suggested as we compiled our list of potential supporters. He was your grandfather's protege, brilliant in both engineering and business strategy. James forced him out 2 years ago, but Sam still holds about 5% of company shares through his early employee options. Where is he now? I asked, vaguely remembering the young engineer Grandpa had mentored from intern to rising executive. Running his own startup across town, still using Bill's design philosophy but applied to medical devices. He's been quite successful. Turned down an acquisition offer from Vertex last year, actually. Eleanor's eyes twinkled. I suspect that's when James started looking more interesting to them as a potential inside man. I added Sam's name to the top of our list, making a note to contact him first thing tomorrow. It was after midnight when I finally returned home. The house was dark except for the subtle glow from the kitchen, where James sat nursing a glass of scotch, his tie loosened and expression thunderous. "Where the hell have you been?" he demanded as I set my purse on the counter. I had to make excuses to the Vertex team about my wife being too ill to attend, but well enough to be out all evening. I poured myself a glass of water, maintaining a calm I didn't entirely feel. I was with Eleanor Thompson. She's been helping me understand what's happened to Meridian over the past few years. James scoffed. Eleanor Thompson is a relic who can't accept that technology companies evolve. Her opinions about Meridian stopped being relevant a decade ago. And yet she predicted the Vertex acquisition before you ever mentioned it to me. I met his gaze directly. When were you planning to tell your wife that you're selling her grandfather's company? His expression shifted from anger to calculated charm so quickly it was almost comical. It's not a sale, Liv. It's a strategic merger. Vertex has distribution channels we need to reach new markets. They have manufacturing capacity that would take us years to build. Together, we can achieve what neither company could alone. And what happens to Meridian's employees after this strategic merger? There will be some natural redundancies, of course. That's standard in any corporate integration. But the strongest talent will remain. Meaning the engineers and manufacturing staff who've been with us for 20 years, the ones who hold Grandpa's values about quality and integrity, will be the first to go. James sighed dramatically. This sentimentality is exactly why you needed to step back from operations. Business isn't about preserving the past, it's about securing the future. The Vertex deal will multiply shareholder value. Even your trust shares will increase significantly. Assuming those shares are accurately reported, I said carefully, watching his reaction. A flicker of something, concern, alarm, crossed his face before his expression resumed its practiced smoothness. What's that supposed to mean? Nothing, I replied, setting down my glass. Just that I'm taking a more active interest in the company again. It's time I honored Grandpa's legacy properly. James stood, moving closer in what once would have felt like an intimate gesture, but now seemed predatory. You've been out of the operational loop for years, Olivia. The learning curve would be steep, and the Vertex negotiations are at a delicate stage. Any disruption could jeopardize the deal. Maybe it should be jeopardized if it means destroying everything Meridian stands for. His jaw tightened. I've worked too hard to let misplaced nostalgia derail this opportunity. The board supports the acquisition. The paperwork is nearly complete. In 3 weeks, the deal will be announced and Meridian will enter its next chapter. 3 weeks, I repeated. That's when the quarterly board meeting is scheduled. Yes, and I expect my wife to stand with me as we announce the most significant advancement in the company's history. I forced a smile. I wouldn't miss it for the world. Later, lying awake in our guest bedroom, I'd claimed a headache. To avoid sharing a bed with him, I mentally reviewed our timeline. 3 weeks to gather allies, collect evidence, and prepare to invoke the founder's integrity clause. It would be tight, but possible with Eleanor's network and the documents from Grandpa's safe deposit box. My phone vibrated with an incoming text. Unknown number, but the message made the sender clear. This is Sam Chen. Eleanor said you might reach out. I've been waiting 3 years for someone named Bennett to remember what Meridian was supposed to stand for. Let's talk tomorrow. 10 a.m., Catalyst Coffee on 3rd. I saved the number, feeling the first real hope since discovering the sabotaged presentation files. Perhaps Grandpa's legacy wasn't lost after all. Morning arrived with a strategically timed text from James. Early meeting with Vertex legal team. Don't wait up tonight. Working dinner to finalize terms. His casual assumption that I remained oblivious was almost insulting, but it provided the freedom I needed. After he left, I dressed with deliberate care in one of the power suits I'd abandoned years ago when stepping back from daily operations. Charcoal gray with subtle pinstripes, a silent homage to Grandpa's preferred attire. Catalyst Coffee was a small industrial chic cafe frequented by the startup community. I spotted Samuel Chen immediately, his attention focused on a laptop screen covered in code I couldn't decipher. At 35, he'd matured from the eager intern I remembered into a confident executive, though his preference for casual attire remained unchanged. Jeans paired with a simple button-down and the same intense focus Grandpa had admired. Olivia. Bennett, he said, standing as I approached. It's been too long. Sam. I accepted his offered handshake. Thank you for meeting me. He gestured to the chair across from him. Eleanor's message said it was important. Something about reclaiming Meridian's soul. That sounded like Bill talking. It's precisely what Grandpa would say if he could see what's happening. I ordered coffee from the waiting server before continuing. James is 3 weeks away from selling Meridian to Vertex Technologies. Sam's expression remained neutral. I've heard rumors. The engineering community is small, and Vertex has been quietly reaching out to key Meridian technical staff to assess who they'd retain post-acquisition. They've approached Meridian engineers already? This was news to me. Selectively. The innovators, not the implementers. They're planning to offshore most production and customization work after acquiring the intellectual property and client relationships. Sam's voice remained calm, but his fingers tightened around his mug. Bill would be devastated. Not just by the business strategy, I agreed, but by the betrayal of everything he built. Meridian was never meant to be stripped for parts. So what's your plan? I assume you have one if Eleanor connected us. I explained about the founder's integrity clause, the Bennett Family Trust's actual holdings, and our emerging coalition of current and former employees. Sam listened intently, occasionally asking precise questions about legal details or voting procedures. When I finished, he sat back, considering. It's viable, but the timing will be tight. James has been isolating potential opposition for years. Many who would support you have been pushed to the margins or out of the company entirely. That's why I need your help. You maintained relationships with the engineering team even after leaving. You understand the technical value that Vertex is really after, and you still hold 5% of company shares. 8% actually. Sam smiled slightly. I never sold a single share, despite some generous offers. Call it loyalty to Bill or stubbornness, but I always believed Meridian would find its way back eventually. Will you help us? He closed his laptop decisively. On one condition. This can't just be about stopping the Vertex deal. It has to be about rebuilding what made Meridian special. The innovation culture, the employee loyalty, the commitment to creating technology that matters rather than just technology that sells. That's exactly what I want, I assured him. Grandpa's vision, updated for today's market. Then I'm in. Sam extended his hand again, this time to seal our alliance. And I can bring at least 3 former engineering directors with me, each holding around 1% of shares. With Sam's commitment, our coalition began taking shape more rapidly than I'd dared hope. By the end of the week, we'd secured support representing nearly 12% of outstanding shares, in addition to the 27% controlled by the Bennett Family Trust. Eleanor's network provided detailed documentation of operational changes that had undermined Meridian's core values and long-term sustainability in favor of short-term financials that made the company attractive to acquirers. Meanwhile, I maintained the appearance of ignorant compliance at home, expressing appropriate interest when James mentioned the strategic partnership, never using the word acquisition, and asking only the superficial questions he expected from a disengaged corporate wife. The deception became increasingly difficult to maintain as I uncovered more evidence of James's systematic betrayal, not just of me personally through his affair with Ashley, but of the entire Meridian community through his dismantling of employee, programs, quality standards, and innovation investments that didn't directly enhance the company's acquisition value. 10 days before the board meeting, I made a critical breakthrough. Marcus Jameson, one of the few remaining IT managers from Grandpa's era, provided access to a secured server containing the complete Vertex acquisition documents that had been carefully kept from the full board. James has been having us maintain this separate server for his special projects for about 18 months, Marcus explained as we reviewed the files in Eleanor's home office. Most of the IT team doesn't have access, but as infrastructure manager, I need admin privileges to maintain the system. The documents revealed the true nature of the Vertex deal. Not a merger of equals, but a complete absorption that would result in the Meridian name being retired within 12 months. Detailed integration plans showed that 68% of current employees would be terminated within 2 years, with only key engineers and sales staff retained. Most devastating was the intellectual property strategy. Meridian's core technologies would be redeployed in lower quality, higher margin products that contradicted everything Grandpa had built the company to create. And there, buried in the compensation schedules, was confirmation of James and Ashley's personal betrayal. Both would receive substantial retention packages and senior positions in the post-acquisition organization, with Ashley mysteriously promoted to Innovation Strategy Director, a role for which she had no apparent qualifications beyond her relationship with James. "This is everything we need," I told my growing coalition during our meeting the following evening. We'd gathered at Sam's startup office after hours, the diverse group united by loyalty to Meridian's original vision, retired executives, current, employees taking significant professional risks, even Robert Weiss, who had finally been given Grandpa's sealed letter and immediately pledged his support. "The Vertex deal violates the company charter in multiple documented ways," Sam agreed. Reviewing our evidence, with the voting power of the Bennett shares properly accounted for plus our coalition's holdings, we have the leverage to invoke the founder's integrity clause successfully. Robert Weiss cleared his throat, his authority as board chairman, lending weight to his words despite his age. "We'll need to move carefully. James controls the board meeting agenda. If he suspects anything, he could try to accelerate the vote or create procedural obstacles. That's why we maintain absolute secrecy until the meeting itself," I confirmed. "Everyone continues as normal. Our documentation is ready but remains secured. When James presents the Vertex acquisition for approval, I'll invoke the clause and present our evidence." Eleanor, who had been quietly observing, spoke up. "There's still a missing piece. The Bennett family trust holdings are being underreported in official records. We need to understand how that happened and correct it before the vote, or James will challenge the math." She was right. The discrepancy between the trust's actual shares, 27%, and the reported holdings, 15%, represented the margin between success and failure for our plan. "I'll visit Frank Morrison tomorrow," I decided, referring to the attorney who had managed the trust since Grandpa's death. "He must have records of the original holdings, and he's the only one who could have authorized any transfers or changes." The meeting concluded with careful assignment of final preparations. Each coalition member had specific responsibilities: securing documentation, preparing legal filings, ensuring technical support for our presentation materials. We were a practiced team now, working with the precision and focus that had once defined Meridian itself. As we dispersed, Sam pulled me aside. "Are you ready for what comes after? Stopping the acquisition is just the beginning. Rebuilding Meridian will be even more challenging." I considered his question seriously. I've been asking myself that every day. The truth is, I don't know if I'm ready, but I know I have to try. Grandpa always said the company was bigger than any individual, including himself. If our coalition succeeds, we'll rebuild together, the way Meridian was always meant to operate. Sam nodded, satisfied. That's what Bill would say. The company was never just about products or profits. It was about people solving important problems together. The next morning, I drove to Morrison & Associates, the law firm that had handled Meridian's legal affairs since its founding. Frank? Morrison had been Grandpa's personal attorney and friend for over 40 years before becoming trustee of the Bennett Family Trust upon Grandpa's death. The receptionist informed me that Frank was in court, but offered to schedule an appointment for later in the week. Too late for our timeline. Explaining it was an urgent trust matter, I asked to speak with whoever was managing the Bennett accounts in Frank's absence. Minutes later, I was shown into a conference room where a young attorney introduced himself as Justin Parker, Frank's associate. "Ms. Bennett, I understand you have questions about the family trust," he began formally. "I should note that while I assist Mr. Morrison with trust administration, he remains the primary point of contact for substantive matters." "I appreciate that, Mr. Parker, but this is time-sensitive. I've discovered a discrepancy in the Trust's Meridian Technologies holdings. Records indicate the Trust controls 15% of outstanding shares, but original documentation shows 27%. I need to understand how and when that changed." Parker's professional demeanor faltered slightly. "That's a significant discrepancy. Let me access the files and see what I can find." He left the room, returning 15 minutes later with a leather portfolio and a troubled expression. "Ms. Bennett, I've reviewed the Trust's transaction history. There appear to be 3 separate share transfers over the past 4 years, each reducing the Trust's holdings by approximately 4%. Who authorized these transfers? That's what concerns me. Each transfer was executed with proper documentation, including what appears to be your signature as beneficiary and Mr. Morrison's as trustee." He slid several documents across the table. "However, I've never seen these transactions before, despite working directly on the Bennett accounts for 3 years. I examined the papers, my stomach tightening as I recognized the signature, a reasonable facsimile of my own, but with subtle differences in the loop of the O and the crossing of the T that no document examiner would miss. These are forgeries," I said quietly. "I never authorized any reduction in the Trust's holdings. And these transaction dates, all 3 occurred during periods when James told me he was handling routine trust paperwork that just needed my signature on multiple documents." Parker's expression grew increasingly concerned. "Ms. Bennett, if these authorizations were fraudulent, this is a serious legal matter that goes beyond trust administration. Mr. Morrison would never knowingly approve such transactions without proper verification. Where is Frank now? When will he return from court?" Parker hesitated before responding. "Mr. Morrison suffered a stroke 3 months ago. He's been on medical leave, working limited hours from home on only his most established client matters. I've been handling most of the day-to-day trust administration under his supervision. The parallels to Grandpa's situation were chilling. Another trusted elder experiencing a medical crisis that created opportunity for manipulation. Who's been meeting with Frank about the Bennett Trust during his recovery? Your husband has visited several times, bringing documents for Mr. Morrison's signature. Given their long relationship, it wasn't seen as unusual." Everything clicked into place. James had taken advantage of Frank's diminished capacity to push through paperwork that the attorney might have questioned when fully healthy. The forged signatures, the strategic timing, the careful maintenance of plausible deniability. It was fraud executed with precision. I need complete documentation of the trust's current legal holdings, I told Parker firmly. And I need to speak with Frank immediately, regardless of his medical condition. Ms. Bennett, I'm not sure that's advisable given his health. Someone has been systematically defrauding my family's trust with forged documents while taking advantage of Frank's medical vulnerability. I think he'd want to know that, don't you? Parker considered this, then nodded. I'll arrange a meeting this afternoon at his home, and I'll prepare certified documentation of the trust's holdings as they currently appear in legal records. Thank you. And Mr. Parker? This conversation remains confidential. If my husband contacts you for any reason, you haven't seen me. The young attorney straightened, professional ethics clearly at the forefront of his mind. Of course. Confidentiality is absolute. And Ms. Bennett? If fraud has occurred, the firm will do everything in its power to rectify it. As I drove away from the law office, my phone rang with James's number displayed on the car's console. I connected, the call through the vehicle system. Olivia, where are you? His voice carried the slightly impatient tone I'd become accustomed to. Ashley said she tried to reach you about the charity gala next week. Vertex executives will be attending, and we need to coordinate outfits. I'm having coffee with Eleanor. I lied smoothly. My phone's been in my purse. Eleanor Thompson again? You've been spending a lot of time with her lately. She's practically family, James, and she has fascinating stories about Meridian's early days. He sighed audibly. Just make sure. You're available this afternoon. The tailor needs to make final adjustments to your gown for the gala. I'll be there, I promised, already knowing I'd need to reschedule after my meeting with Frank Morrison. How are the Vertex discussions going? Finalizing details. Everything's on track for the board presentation next week. His voice brightened, interpreting my question as genuine interest rather than intelligence gathering. There's still a confidentiality agreement in place, but I can tell you that the compensation package they're offering for our executive team is exceptional. That's wonderful, I replied, careful to maintain the supportive wife persona. You deserve recognition for all your hard work. We both do. This deal will secure our future, Liv. Trust me on this. As I ended the call, the irony of his final words wasn't lost on me. Trust, the very thing he had systematically violated, both personally and professionally. In 10 days, he would discover exactly how misplaced his confidence had been, not just in my continued ignorance, but in his ability to dismantle everything Grandpa had built. The Bennett legacy wouldn't end with a boardroom vote and a press release announcing Meridian's acquisition. It would continue through the coalition we were building, the values we were reclaiming, and the company we would rebuild from the foundation my grandfather had established decades ago. Frank Morrison's elegant colonial home sat on a tree-lined street in the city's historic district, its meticulous gardens reflecting the same attention to detail that had characterized his legal practice. Parker had arranged for us to meet at 3 p.m., warning me that Frank's energy was limited following his stroke. The attorney who greeted me at the door was dramatically changed from the commanding presence I remembered. Thinner, one side of his face showing the telltale droop of stroke damage, his movements careful and deliberate. But his eyes remained sharp, his mind clearly engaged despite the physical challenges. Olivia, he said, his speech slightly slurred but intelligible. Long overdue. Sit. Parker helped him settle into a comfortable chair in the study before discreetly withdrawing, to give us privacy. Frank's home office was a shrine to his legal career, diplomas and certifications sharing wall space with photographs of significant cases and clients, including several featuring my grandfather at various company milestones. Parker said, "Trust. Issues," Frank stated, each word requiring visible effort. "Yes. I've discovered discrepancies in the Bennett family trust holdings. I explained the situation as concisely as possible, showing him the documents with the forged signatures and the original trust records from Grandpa's safe deposit box. Frank examined them with painstaking care, his attorney's attention to detail undiminished by his physical condition. When he finished, his expression contained equal parts grief and rage. "Betrayal," he said finally. "Your signature, and mine, forged. Can we correct the record before the board meeting? Legally establish that the trust still holds 27% of Meridian shares?" Frank nodded slowly. "Affidavit, document fraud, emergency injunction." He gestured toward a button on the desk that presumably summoned Parker. "We'll fix this. Your grandfather, my friend, promised him." His determined loyalty to Grandpa's memory brought unexpected tears to my eyes. "Thank you, Frank. This means everything." "James Morgan," Frank said with difficulty, obvious anger in his voice. "Brought papers, during recovery. Couldn't focus well. Trusted him. Your husband." He shook his head in disgust at his own vulnerability. "It wasn't your fault," I assured. "Him? He manipulated your condition, just as he's manipulated everyone around him." Parker returned, and Frank gave him precise, if halting, instructions for preparing the necessary legal documents to restore the trust's rightful holdings and document the fraud. Within an hour, we had a clear plan for filing emergency paperwork that would correct the share records before the critical board meeting. As I prepared to leave, Frank reached for my hand, his grip surprisingly strong despite his physical limitations. "Your grandfather built for people, not just profits." His eyes held mine intently. "Remember that, when you win." "I will," I promised. "Meridian will be what he intended again." Eleanor assembled a comprehensive presentation documenting how Meridian's core values and long-term viability had been compromised under James's leadership. Robert Weiss prepared to use his authority as board chairman to ensure procedural fairness when I invoked the founder's integrity clause. Everything was in place for the confrontation that would determine Meridian's future. 3 days before the board meeting, I received an unexpected text from Ashley. "James asked me to confirm you'll be at the Vertex dinner tomorrow night. Dress code is formal. He says it's non-negotiable." The message's commanding tone perfectly captured the dynamic that had developed. James and Ashley making decisions, issuing instructions, and expecting compliance. Tomorrow night would be my final performance as the oblivious corporate wife. Before the board meeting, that would change everything. I replied simply, "I'll be there." That evening, James arrived home earlier than usual, his demeanor uncharacteristically attentive as he poured himself a scotch in the kitchen. "The Vertex CEO is looking forward to meeting you tomorrow," he said casually. "I've told him what a supportive partner you've been through this process." "Have you?" I kept my tone neutral while slicing vegetables for dinner. "And what process would that be exactly? You've been quite vague about the details." James set down his glass, moving closer to rest his hands on my shoulders, a gesture that once felt intimate, but now seemed calculated. "I know I've been secretive. Liv. The negotiations required discretion, but we're past that now." He turned me to face him. "Vertex is acquiring Meridian in a deal that values the company at nearly triple its current market cap. Our shareholders will receive unprecedented returns." "And the employees? The innovations in development? Grandpa's legacy?" His expression flickered with momentary irritation before settling back into practiced charm. "The employees will have opportunities within a much larger organization. The best talent will be retained, of course. As for Bill's legacy, this deal ensures Meridian's technologies reach a global market that would have taken us decades to penetrate independently." He was delivering a rehearsed pitch, the same one he'd undoubtedly used to convince board members and major shareholders. The careful language, "best talent retained rather than most employees terminated," was classic James, technically truthful while fundamentally deceptive. "It sounds like you've thought of everything," I remarked, returning to my dinner preparation. "I'm looking forward to hearing more details tomorrow." James seemed pleased by my apparent acceptance, mistaking strategic patience for surrender. "You'll be impressed with their leadership team. The Vertex CEO started in engineering, like you. I think you'll appreciate his vision." I smiled non-committally and changed the subject to safer topics for the remainder of the evening. Later, after James fell asleep, I sent updates to our coalition confirming that the Vertex dinner would proceed as expected. Everything remained on schedule for our intervention at the board meeting. The following evening, I dressed with deliberate care, choosing an elegant black gown that James had always admired, styling my hair in a sophisticated updo that emphasized professionalism rather than merely complimenting my husband's image. The woman in the mirror looked polished, confident, and completely unlike the compliant partner James had come to expect. "You look stunning," he commented as I descended the stairs, his gaze appreciative but possessive. "The Vertex team will be impressed." "Is that my purpose tonight? To impress your business associates?" He laughed, adjusting his bow tie in the entryway mirror. "Everyone has a role in these situations, Liv. Mine is to articulate the strategic vision. Yours is to embody the Meridian culture they're acquiring, sophisticated, intelligent, with the right heritage." "The Meridian culture," I repeated softly. "I wonder if they know what that actually means." James either missed the edge in my voice or chose to ignore it. "The car service is waiting. We should go. Richard dislikes tardiness." The dinner was held in a private room at Elysium, the city's most exclusive restaurant. As we entered, I immediately identified Richard Harmon, Vertex's CEO, a tall man with steel gray hair and the confident posture of someone accustomed to commanding attention. Beside him stood a woman I presumed was his wife, elegant in a conservative blue dress. 5 other Vertex executives completed the circle, along with Ashley, who wore a dress so similar to mine it couldn't have been coincidental. Her eyes widened slightly at my appearance before she composed herself, moving deliberately closer to James as we approached the group. "Richard, allow me to introduce my wife, Olivia Bennett Hamilton," James said formally. "Olivia, this is Richard Harmon, CEO of Vertex Technologies." "Bennett," Richard repeated, his handshake firm as he studied me with increased interest. "William?" "Bennett's granddaughter. Your grandfather was a legend in this industry." "He established principles that still guide Meridian today," I replied pointedly. "Quality over quantity. Innovation with integrity. Employees as family, not resources." Something flickered in Richard's expression. Recognition, perhaps, that I was not the decorative spouse he'd anticipated. Admirable philosophies. Different times, of course, but the sentiment remains valuable. "Some principles transcend market cycles, Mr. Harmon," James smoothly interjected, steering the conversation toward safer territory as we were seated for dinner. I found myself strategically placed between Richard and another Vertex executive, while James sat across from us beside Ashley, whose position at this high-level gathering would have been questionable if anyone had bothered to examine her actual role at Meridian. Throughout the exquisite 5-course meal, I maintained the delicate balance of appearing supportive while gathering intelligence. Richard proved surprisingly forthcoming after his second glass of wine, particularly when I asked thoughtful questions about Vertex's integration philosophy. "Acquisition integration is always challenging," he acknowledged. "Cultural differences, redundant positions, competing priorities. We've developed a formula that minimizes disruption to the essential operations." "Essential operations," I echoed. "And how do you define what's essential?" Richard exchanged glances with James before responding. "Revenue-generating functions, proprietary technology development, key client relationships, the value drivers that justified the acquisition price. And manufacturing, quality control, The engineering teams working on long-term innovations rather than immediate market applications? Those areas typically see the most significant restructuring, Richard admitted. Efficiency gains are a primary value creation mechanism in technology acquisitions. Efficiency gains, I repeated. A more palatable term than layoffs, isn't it? James interrupted with forced joviality. Olivia has a deep personal connection to Meridian's history. Her grandfather's company was very much a family business in its early days. And family businesses sometimes struggle with the transition to modern corporate structures, Richard said sympathetically. But I assure you, Ms. Bennett, Meridian's legacy will be respected within the Vertex organization. The Meridian name will continue? I asked innocently, knowing from the acquisition documents that it would be phased out within a year. Richard hesitated just long enough to confirm the deception. Elements of the Meridian brand have significant market value that we intend to leverage appropriately. I see. I smiled pleasantly. And the Meridian Foundation's commitments to STEM education in underserved communities, the employee scholarship program, the environmental initiatives my grandfather established? This time, James intervened before Richard could respond. Those programs will be evaluated within Vertex's broader corporate social responsibility framework. Richard's team has an excellent track record of community engagement. The careful non-answers and strategic deflections continued throughout dinner, each exchange confirming what our coalition had already documented. Vertex intended to extract Meridian's valuable assets while discarding its core identity and commitments. The acquisition was not a partnership of aligned visions, but a dismantling operation disguised as a merger. As dessert was served, Ashley leaned toward James with a familiarity that crossed professional boundaries, her hand briefly resting on his arm as she whispered something that made him smile. The gesture wasn't lost on Richard's wife, whose raised eyebrow suggested she recognized the dynamic at play. When James excused himself briefly, Richard took the opportunity to speak with me directly. "Your husband has been an exceptional negotiating partner," he said, his tone more candid than it had been all evening. "He understands that business evolution sometimes requires difficult decisions." "James has always been adaptable," I agreed, "particularly when it benefits him personally." Richard studied me, reassessing. "The transition package we've offered him reflects his value to the integration process. His leadership will be crucial in maintaining continuity." "And Ashley Wilson, does her transition package also reflect her value to the process?" A flicker of awareness crossed Richard's face. "Ms. Wilson has demonstrated impressive aptitude for someone early in her career. James suggested she has significant potential in our organization." "I'm sure he did." Richard hesitated, then lowered his voice. "Mrs. Hamilton, I've been acquiring companies for 20 years. I recognize when family dynamics complicate business transitions. If there are personal concerns affecting your perspective on this acquisition, my perspective on this acquisition is based entirely on what's best for Meridian Technologies, its employees, and its legacy," I interrupted firmly. "Personal considerations are irrelevant." James returned before Richard could respond, and the conversation shifted to safer topics. As the evening concluded with polite handshakes and promises of future collaboration, I maintained my poised facade while inwardly confirming that our intervention at the board meeting was not merely justified but essential. In the car returning home, James was ebullient. "Richard was impressed with you. Said you asked more insightful questions than half his executive team. He's dismantling my grandfather's company while you help him do it. Forgive me if I wanted to understand his reasoning." James stiffened at my tone. "I thought you'd finally accepted the business reality here. The acquisition is happening, Olivia. The documentation is complete. The board vote is a formality at this point." "Nothing is final until the vote," I replied. "Isn't that what you always say about negotiations?" He studied me in the dim light of the car's interior. "What's going on with you? These past few weeks you've been different. More engaged with Meridian, spending time with Eleanor, asking questions about operations that never interested you before. Perhaps I've realized that stepping away from my grandfather's company was a mistake, that trusting others to honor his legacy was naive. If you're implying I've mismanaged Meridian, I'm not implying anything, James. I'm simply reconsidering my own choices." He fell silent for the remainder of the drive, his expression calculating as he reassessed the situation. I'd shown my hand perhaps more than intended, but it hardly mattered now. In less than 48 hours, the carefully constructed reality James had built would collapse entirely. That night, I moved quietly through our home, gathering essential documents and personal items I couldn't bear to lose if circumstances deteriorated rapidly after the board meeting. The prenuptial agreement James had insisted upon, designed to protect his assets in case of divorce, would ironically shield my trust holdings and inheritance when our marriage inevitably ended. Another miscalculation in his grand strategy. The day before the board meeting dawned with a tense silence between us. James left early for final preparations, texting later that he'd be working late and not to wait up. I spent the day confirming arrangements with our coalition, reviewing legal documents with Frank Morrison's team, and preparing mentally for the confrontation ahead. Sam called mid-afternoon with unexpected news. "Timothy Foster wants to meet with you, today." Timothy Foster was Meridian's largest independent shareholder after the Bennett Trust, controlling nearly 8% of the company. A venture capitalist who had invested early in Meridian, he maintained a hands-off approach to governance, but wielded significant influence when he chose to engage. James had assured the coalition that Foster supported the Vertex acquisition. Did he say why? Asked, immediately suspicious of a last-minute intervention. Only that he's reconsidering his position on the Vertex deal and wants to hear directly from a Bennett before making his final decision. He requested a private meeting at his office at 4 p.m. I checked the time, 2:30. "I'll be there. This could change everything if he's genuinely wavering." Foster's office occupied the top floor of a downtown high-rise, the space reflecting his reputation for understated wealth and strategic thinking. His assistant escorted me directly to a conference room where the investor waited alone, his expression unreadable as he rose to greet me. "Ms. Bennett, thank you for coming on such short notice." "It's Mrs. Hamilton legally, but Bennett in every way that matters today," I replied, accepting his handshake. "Sam Chen said you wanted to discuss the Vertex acquisition." Foster gestured for me to sit. "I've supported your husband's leadership at Meridian for several years. James has a gift for articulating compelling growth narratives that appeal to investors like me." "He's certainly gifted at narratives," I agreed neutrally. "However," Foster continued, "I've recently received concerning information about the Vertex deal that contradicts those narratives. Specifically, the post-acquisition plans for Meridian's core technologies and workforce." "What kind of information?" Foster slid a folder across the table. "Engineering specifications for Vertex's planned product integration. They intend to dismantle Meridian's commitment to quality and durability in favor of planned obsolescence and higher replacement cycles. The projected 5-year revenue models depend on it." I reviewed the documents. Technical specifications showing how Meridian's industry-leading components would be degraded to reduce costs and increase failure rates after warranty periods. It was a direct violation of everything Grandpa had built the company to stand against. "Where did you get these?" "I maintain relationships with technical advisors in companies I invest in. Sometimes they share concerns when strategic directions conflict with engineering ethics." Foster leaned forward. "I invested in Meridian because William Bennett built products that mattered, technology that solved real problems reliably. This pivot to disposable innovation troubles me deeply." "It contradicts everything my grandfather valued," I agreed. and everything Meridian stands for. So, I'm learning. Foster's gaze was evaluative. James tells me you've been uninvolved in company operations for years. Yet here you are, clearly concerned about Meridian's future. What's changed? I considered how much to reveal about our coalition and strategy. Foster's support would virtually guarantee success, but trusting him remained a calculated risk. I made a mistake stepping away from Meridian after my grandfather died. I trusted James to honor the company's founding principles while I processed my grief. That trust was misplaced. And now you want to stop the Vertex acquisition. I want to restore Meridian's integrity as a technology creator, as an employer, and as my grandfather's legacy. If that means stopping the acquisition, then yes. Foster nodded slowly. I've heard rumors about tomorrow's board meeting, something about a founder's provision in the original charter. News of our plan had spread further than intended. The Founder's Integrity Clause allows Bennett family shareholders to call for special voting procedures when the company's core principles are threatened. With sufficient shareholder support, founding family shares receive triple voting weight on matters of corporate governance, effectively giving you controlling interest for this specific vote, Foster concluded. Clever of your grandfather to build in such protection. He understood that what takes decades to build can be dismantled in months without proper safeguards. Foster was silent for a long moment, studying me with the calculating gaze that had made him a legendary investor. Your grandfather once told me that technology without conscience is just expensive garbage. I didn't fully appreciate his meaning at the time. And now? Now I see the Vertex acquisition for what it is, a conversion of Meridian's conscience into quarterly returns. He closed the folder decisively. My 2% voting interest will support invoking the Founder's Integrity Clause tomorrow. Relief washed through me. With Foster's shares, our coalition now controlled well over 45% of V. Voting interest, more than enough to ensure success. Thank you, Mr. Foster. This significantly strengthens our position. Don't thank me yet. Corporate governance challenges are never as straightforward as they appear on paper. James won't surrender control without deploying every resource at his disposal. We're prepared for resistance. Foster's expression remained serious. Are you prepared for what comes after? Stopping the acquisition is only the first step. Rebuilding Meridian to honor your grandfather's vision while succeeding in today's market will be equally challenging. I have a remarkable coalition of people who understood that vision and are committed to its modern application. We're not trapped in nostalgia. We're reclaiming principles that never stopped being relevant. Then you have my support, Ms. Bennett, both tomorrow and in the rebuilding to come. Foster extended his hand again. It's time Meridian remembered who built it and why. As I left Foster's office, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Emergency Coalition. Meeting at Eleanor's. Come immediately. Potential security breach. The cryptic message sent a chill through me. I took a circuitous route to Eleanor's home, watching for any signs of surveillance, and entered through the side gate rather than the front door as instructed in a follow-up message. Inside, I found our core team gathered in Eleanor's kitchen. Sam, Robert Weiss, Frank Morrison's associate Justin Parker, and Eleanor herself, her expression grave as she waved me to a seat at the table. What happened? I asked, scanning their concerned faces. Marcus from IT was just fired, Sam explained. Security escorted him out an hour ago. His access credentials were revoked, and his company devices confiscated. Marcus was our key information source within Meridian's current operations. Did they discover his connection to us? We don't know, Eleanor replied. But the timing is suspicious, coming the day before the board meeting. His termination paperwork cited unauthorized access to executive documents. They know. Robert's voice carried the weight of his decades in corporate governance. Or, at the very least, They suspect something is happening. James is taking preventive measures. Have we been compromised? I asked the question everyone was thinking. Do they know about the founder's integrity clause? Our coalition? Sam shook his head. Marcus was careful. He only accessed documents he had legitimate reason to view as IT infrastructure manager. But his termination means James is tightening security ahead of tomorrow's meeting. We should assume they're taking additional precautions, Robert advised. Procedural barriers, security presence, restricted access to the boardroom. Can they actually prevent me from attending? The thought hadn't occurred to me until now. I'm still technically a director, even if my role has been marginalized. They could attempt to invoke emergency bylaws citing conflict of interest, Justin Parker suggested. It would be legally questionable, but could create temporary obstacles requiring court intervention to resolve, potentially delaying the vote until after the acquisition documents are executed. Then we need contingency plans. I looked around the table at our coalition leaders. Alternative ways to ensure I can present our case and invoke the clause if traditional access is blocked. For the next 2 hours, we developed backup strategies for every scenario we could imagine, from restricted building access to manipulated voting procedures. Robert, as board chairman, committed to exercising his authority to ensure procedural fairness. Sam prepared to distribute our evidence to all board members electronically if necessary. Eleanor mobilized retired executives who still maintained relationships with security personnel to ensure physical access to the building. By evening, we had contingencies for our contingencies, each team member clear on their responsibilities and communication protocols. The coalition had transformed from a strategic planning group into something resembling a tactical response team, prepared for corporate warfare rather than merely a challenging board meeting. As our meeting concluded, Eleanor pulled me aside. Your grandfather would be proud of you, Olivia, not just for fighting for the company, but for how you've done it. Building consensus, honoring relationships, focusing on principles rather than personalities. Even though one of those personalities deserves far worse than he's going to get? I asked wryly, thinking of James's systematic betrayals. Eleanor smiled. Bill always said success was the best revenge. Reclaiming Meridian will hurt James. Far more than any personal retribution ever could. You're taking back what matters. That night, I didn't return home. James's text asking about my whereabouts received a vague response about dinner with friends, while I actually checked into a hotel under Eleanor's name. The precaution felt melodramatic until Sam called with news that James had requested building security protocols be enhanced for tomorrow's board meeting, with specific attention to visitor verification. He's definitely suspicious, Sam concluded, but I don't think he knows the full extent of what we've prepared. His focus seems to be on restricting access rather than countering the founder's integrity clause specifically. Then we maintain our strategy, I decided. And I'll arrive early with Robert to ensure we're in place before any additional restrictions can be implemented. Sleep came fitfully that night, my mind cycling through scenarios and contingencies until exhaustion finally prevailed. I dreamed of Grandpa standing in his original factory, surrounded by the first products Meridian had ever created, his expression both proud and concerned as he handed me his worn leather briefcase, the one he'd carried to every important meeting throughout his career. I woke at dawn, the dream lingering as I prepared for the day that would determine Meridian's future. My choice of attire was deliberate, a navy blue suit reminiscent of the company's original colors, with a small silver pin shaped like Meridian's original logo that Grandpa had given me when I graduated from engineering school. Professional, authoritative, and unmistakably connected to the company's heritage. Robert Weiss collected me at the hotel at 7:15 a.m., his car already containing Sam and Justin Parker. The board meeting was scheduled for 9 a.m., but our plan required establishing presence well in advance. Security has been doubled at all entrances, Sam reported as we drove. but Robert's chairman credentials should get us through without issue. Once inside, we go directly to the boardroom to prepare. Is Foster confirmed? I asked, still concerned about our newest ally's commitment. His assistant confirmed he'll arrive by 8:30, Robert replied, and Frank Morrison has submitted the legal documentation correcting the Bennett Trust holdings. Everything is in place. We arrived at Meridian headquarters at 7:40 a.m., approaching the executive entrance where Robert's credentials would provide the most direct access. As predicted, security had been visibly enhanced. Additional guards, ID verification stations, and a sense of unusual alertness among the staff. Robert approached the security desk with confidence, presenting his board chairman credentials. Good morning, gentlemen. We have pre-meeting preparations to complete. The guard examined Robert's identification, then consulted a tablet. I'm sorry, Mr. Weiss, but we have instructions to restrict early access to the executive floor today. Building security protocols have been temporarily enhanced. On whose authority? Robert demanded. As board chairman, I determine security protocols for board meetings. I'm just following the instructions in the system, sir. The guard gestured to his screen. The restrictions were entered by Mr. Morgan last night, citing Section 7 of the Emergency Management Procedures. This is absurd, Robert began, but I touched his arm lightly, indicating we should step back for a private conference. They're deliberately blocking early access, I whispered once we were out of earshot. Plan B? Sam nodded, already texting on his phone. Eleanor's contact in maintenance is confirming the service elevator is operational and unmonitored. We can access it through the loading dock. Go, Robert agreed. I'll continue attempting official entry to maintain their focus here. Justin, and I will meet you upstairs if successful, or join you through the alternate route if necessary. Sam and I exited through a side door, circling the building to approach the loading dock where deliveries were already underway for the day. Eleanor's contact, a maintenance supervisor who had worked at Meridian since Grandpa's era, was waiting beside an unmarked door. Ms. Bennett, he said quietly, swiping his access card. Your grandfather gave me my first job when no one else would hire an ex-con trying to rebuild his life. This way. He led us through service corridors to a freight elevator that connected all floors of the building, including the executive level. This won't take you directly to the boardroom, but it will get you to the executive floor. From there, you'll need to navigate past the executive assistant station. Thank you, I said sincerely. What's your name? Michael Torres, ma'am. 32 years at Meridian, and I still remember when your grandfather would walk the maintenance areas on Fridays to thank us personally for keeping the building running. When this is over, Michael, I hope you'll tell me more about those days. His weathered face brightened. Would be my honor, Ms. Bennett. The service elevator deposited us in a utility corridor on the executive floor, the institutional green walls a stark contrast to the sleek design of the public areas. Sam checked his phone for an updated floor plan Eleanor had provided, indicating a path to the boardroom that avoided the main reception area. Through here, then left at the next junction, he whispered. We'll emerge near the executive break room, just down the hall from the boardroom. We moved quickly through the service areas, emerging precisely where Sam had indicated. The executive floor seemed unusually quiet for a major board meeting day. No staff visible in the break room, no assistants at their stations. Something's not right, I murmured. Where is everyone? Sam frowned, checking his watch. It's only 8:05. Maybe they haven't arrived yet. Administrative staff would be here by now, preparing documents and arranging refreshments. Years of observing corporate protocols made the absence glaring. James has cleared the floor of potential witnesses. We approached the boardroom cautiously, finding the lights already on inside. Through the glass walls, I could see James standing at the head of the table, engaged in intense conversation with 3 board members I recognized as his strongest allies. Ashley stood nearby, tablet in hand, occasionally contributing to the Discussion. They've moved up the meeting, Sam whispered. Or they're holding a pre-meeting to secure votes. We need to interrupt before they can formalize anything. I straightened my jacket and approached the door with determined steps. Sam close behind. James looked up sharply as we entered, surprise quickly masked by practiced corporate composure. Olivia. This is unexpected. The board meeting isn't scheduled until 9. Then this must be an unofficial gathering, I replied pleasantly. How convenient that I've arrived in time to join you. Ashley's expression tightened. This is a private executive briefing, Mrs. Hamilton. Perhaps you could wait in the reception area until the official meeting begins. That won't be necessary, Ms. Wilson. As Meridian's Director of International Partnerships and Bennett Family Trustee, I have every right to attend discussions regarding company governance. I set my briefcase on the table decisively, particularly when those discussions appear to be deliberately scheduled to exclude certain perspectives. James's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. We're simply reviewing procedural matters before the full board arrives. Nothing that concerns your limited portfolio. I think we both know that's not true. I turned to address the board. Members directly. Gentlemen, I apologize for the interruption, but I believe you may be participating in discussions without full information about today's agenda. The oldest of the three, Walter Daniels, a longtime investor, raised an eyebrow. What information would that be, Mrs. Hamilton? The fact that a significant coalition of shareholders, including the Bennett Family Trust, intends to invoke the Founder's Integrity Clause during today's meeting to halt the Vertex acquisition and address leadership concerns. The reaction was immediate, Walter's surprise evident, the younger board members exchanging alarmed glances, and James's expression hardening into controlled fury. The Founder's Integrity Clause is an obsolete provision that has never been invoked, James stated flatly. And the Bennett Trust holdings represent only 15% of shares, hardly sufficient to impact today's vote even if such an archaic mechanism were valid. The trust actually controls 27% of Meridian shares, I corrected calmly. The discrepancy you're referring to resulted from fraudulent transactions currently under legal review. Documentation correcting the record has been filed with the corporate secretary. Walter Daniels turned to James. Is this accurate? Has the trust's holding been misrepresented? Before James could respond, the boardroom door opened again as Robert Weiss entered with Justin Parker and another figure, Timothy Foster, arriving earlier than expected. I believe I can address that question, Justin stated, placing a legal folder on the table. As legal counsel representing the Bennett Family Trust, we've submitted documentation confirming the trust's legitimate 27% ownership interest, along with evidence of unauthorized transactions that temporarily obscured those holdings. The atmosphere in the room shifted perceptibly as the balance of power realigned. James's private briefing had been transformed into the opening salvos of the very confrontation he'd been trying to prevent. This is a transparent attempt to disrupt a value-creating transaction, James declared, his voice steady despite the growing tension. The Vertex acquisition has been thoroughly vetted by our financial advisors and legal team. It represents exceptional shareholder value and has the support of our major investors. Not all of them, Timothy Foster interjected, stepping forward. As an 82% shareholder, I have significant concerns about the acquisition terms and Meridian's direction under current leadership. James stared at Foster, genuine shock breaking through his composed facade. Tim, we discussed this extensively. You indicated full support for the transaction. That was before I received complete information. About the post-acquisition plans? Foster replied evenly. Specifically, the intended degradation of Meridian's quality standards and the planned obsolescence strategies for core product lines. More board members began arriving, confusion evident as they encountered the tense gathering already underway. Robert Weiss, exercising his authority as chairman, called for order. It appears we have substantive matters to address before any acquisition vote can proceed. As chairman, I'm adjusting today's agenda to begin with the matters raised by Mrs. Hamilton regarding the founder's integrity clause. James made one final attempt to regain control. Robert, this is procedurally irregular. The acquisition documents are time-sensitive. Vertex expects a decision today. And they'll receive one, Robert assured him. After the board has reviewed all relevant information and addressed the governance questions properly raised by a significant shareholder. As the remaining board members took their seats, I caught Ashley sliding a tablet toward James, her expression conveying silent alarm. He glanced at the screen, then back at me with new calculation in his eyes. The confrontation had begun earlier than planned, in circumstances we hadn't anticipated. But our coalition was present, our documentation ready, and the board now alert to the questions that needed answering. Whatever last-minute strategy James and Ashley were formulating would face a prepared opposition with truth as its primary weapon. The boardroom gradually filled to capacity, murmured conversations creating a low buzz of anticipation. Eleanor arrived with several retired executives whose combined shareholdings strengthened our coalition. Frank Morrison made a surprising appearance, his physical limitations evident, but his legal mind clearly engaged as he conferred quietly with Justin. At precisely 9 a.m., Robert Weiss called the meeting to order, his authoritative voice silencing the room. Before we proceed with today's agenda, I must acknowledge that significant governance concerns have been raised regarding both the proposed Vertex acquisition and the current representation of major shareholder interests. As chairman, I have a fiduciary duty to ensure these matters are properly addressed before any irreversible decisions are made. James rose from his seat, projecting confidence despite the deteriorating situation. With respect, Mr. Chairman, the board has already conducted extensive due diligence on the Vertex transaction. The acquisition agreement has been reviewed by outside counsel, our financial advisors have confirmed fair value, and the integration plan addresses all material concerns. Any delay jeopardizes a deal that delivers exceptional returns to our shareholders. Not all concerns have been addressed, I interjected, rising to face the board. And not all relevant information has been disclosed. The integration plan presented to this board systematically obscures Vertex's intentions for Meridian's technologies, workforce, and corporate identity. Mrs. Hamilton has limited access to the integration documentation, James countered smoothly. Her perspectives are based on outdated information and personal attachments rather than business realities. My perspective is based on Meridian's founding principles and the complete acquisition documents that Vertex provided to our engineering teams for implementation planning, I replied, opening my briefcase to remove a bound presentation folder, including these technical specifications detailing how Meridian's industry-leading components will be deliberately degraded to increase replacement cycles and aftermarket sales. I distributed copies to each board member, watching as they reviewed the damning evidence, detailed technical plans showing how Meridian's commitment to quality and durability would be systematically dismantled to maximize short-term profits. These documents weren't included in the board materials, Walter Daniels noted, looking up with concern. Why were we not shown these specifications? James's composure wavered momentarily. Those are preliminary engineering discussions, not final implementation plans. All acquisitions involve harmonizing technical standards across product lines. Harmonizing standards? Foster echoed incredulously. These specifications explicitly call for reducing component lifespan by 40% and eliminating redundant safety features to reduce costs. That's not harmonization. It's deliberate degradation of Meridian's core value proposition. While the board examined the technical documents, I nodded to Sam, who distributed additional materials, detailed analysis of the post-acquisition organizational plans showing the systematic elimination of Meridian employees, facilities, and eventually the company name itself. The complete integration plan, which wasn't shared with this board, calls for 68% workforce reduction within 18 months, I explained. The Meridian brand will be completely retired by year 3, with all intellectual property redeployed under Vertex labels. The evidence was damning, but James remained a skilled corporate strategist. He nodded to Ashley, who activated the room's main display screen. These selective extracts create a misleading impression, James argued. The full integration plan balances necessary corporate efficiencies with preservation of Meridian's most valuable assets, its innovative technologies and key talent. The screen displayed carefully curated slides highlighting positive aspects of the acquisition: market expansion opportunities, investment in select research initiatives, retention packages for unnamed key innovators. What the extracted documents don't show, James continued, regaining confidence, is the broader strategic vision that makes these changes necessary for Meridian's long-term relevance in an increasingly competitive market. It was a masterful pivot, acknowledging the concerning details while reframing them as necessary sacrifices for a greater vision. James had always excelled at crafting narratives that made difficult decisions seem both inevitable and enlightened. This broader strategic vision, I responded, maintaining my composure, appears primarily focused on extracting short-term value from Meridian's assets while systematically dismantling everything that made the company successful in the first place. James sighed with practiced patience. Olivia, I understand your emotional attachment to your grandfather's company, but business strategy requires objective analysis, not sentiment. The technology landscape has changed dramatically since William Bennett's era. Has it? I challenged, stepping toward the center of the room. Have customers stopped valuing quality? Have employees stopped performing better when treated with respect? Has integrity become obsolete as a business principle? Before James could respond, I addressed the board directly. The fundamental question today isn't whether Meridian should evolve. Of course it should. The question is whether that evolution should abandon the core principles that built this company's success over 4 decades. Robert Weiss nodded, reclaiming control of the meeting. Which brings us to the matter of the founder's integrity clause. Mrs. Hamilton has indicated her intention to invoke this provision of the original corporate charter, a provision that has never been used and was likely included as a symbolic gesture rather than an enforceable governance mechanism, James interjected. Our corporate counsel has advised that such legacy provisions have questionable validity, given subsequent charter amendments. Frank Morrison spoke for the first time. As the attorney who drafted that provision with William Bennett, I can assure this board that the founder's integrity clause was designed specifically for circumstances like these. It was included with the explicit understanding that it would supersede subsequent amendments if the company's founding principles were threatened. The boardroom fell silent as Frank continued, his speech deliberate but clear. William Bennett believed that corporations, like people, required a moral compass to guide their evolution. The clause ensures that compass cannot be discarded for temporary financial advantage. James's expression hardened. With all due respect to Mr. Morrison's historical perspective, modern corporate governance operates under different principles. The board's fiduciary duty is to maximize shareholder value. The clause doesn't prohibit maximizing value, I countered. It simply ensures that value creation aligns with the company's fundamental purpose and principles that created exceptional value for 4 decades before the current leadership began dismantling them. Robert Weiss cleared his throat. As chairman, I must ensure proper procedure is followed. Mrs. Hamilton, are you formally invoking the founder's integrity clause at this time? I am. I placed the original charter document on the table, the clause in question highlighted, for all to see. As granddaughter of founder William Bennett and trustee of the Bennett Family Trust, I invoke the founder's integrity clause on the grounds that the proposed Vertex acquisition fundamentally contradicts Meridian's established principles regarding product integrity, employee commitment, and corporate responsibility. For this invocation to proceed, Robert continued, it requires support from shareholders representing at least 25% of outstanding shares. Do you have documentation of such support? I nodded to Justin Parker, who distributed certified statements from our coalition members. The Bennett Family Trust controls 27% of shares. Additionally, we have formal support from shareholders representing a further 22%, for total supporting interest of 49% of outstanding shares. James examined the documents, his controlled facade cracking with genuine alarm. These shareholder statements can't be verified in real time. The board can't possibly accept them without due diligence. Each statement has been notarized and certified by independent counsel, Justin replied. But if the board requires additional verification, the shareholders in question are prepared to confirm their positions directly. Timothy Foster spoke from his seat. As an 82% shareholder, I formally confirm my support for invoking the Founder's Integrity Clause based on the evidence presented regarding the Vertex acquisition and its contradiction of Meridian's core principles. Eleanor Thompson stood next. As trustee for the Meridian Employees Investment Coalition, representing 37% of shares, I confirm our support for invoking the clause. One by one, coalition members present in the room declared their positions. With each statement, James's expression grew colder, calculations visibly running behind his eyes as the mathematical reality became undeniable. When the declarations concluded, Robert Weiss addressed the room. The threshold for invoking the Founder's Integrity Clause has been met. Per the provision's terms, this triggers special voting procedures for any matters involving corporate governance or strategic direction. This is procedural manipulation, James declared, abandoning pretense of calm acceptance. The Vertex acquisition has been under development for months, with full board participation and oversight. To derail it at the final stage based on an obscure charter provision is not just irresponsible, it's potentially actionable. The time for threats has passed, James, I said quietly. The documentation speaks for itself. You've been systematically undermining Meridian's founding principles while preparing to sell the company to an acquirer who will finish dismantling everything my grandfather built. Everything I've done has been to strengthen Meridian's market position and ensure its future in an increasingly competitive industry, James insisted, looking around the room for support. The sentimentality Olivia is advocating would leave us vulnerable to larger competitors with fewer constraints. A tense silence followed his declaration. Even James's closest allies on the board seemed unsettled by the evidence presented and the formidable coalition arrayed against them. Walter Daniels broke the silence. I've served on this board for 15 years. I knew William Bennett personally and respected his vision for Meridian. But I've also supported James's leadership because I believed he was modernizing that vision for today's market realities. He looked directly at me. The evidence presented today suggests otherwise. These integration plans don't represent evolution of William's principles. They represent abandonment of them. Ashley, who had remained strategically silent throughout the proceedings, finally intervened. Mr. Daniels, with respect, these documents represent preliminary planning scenarios, not final implementation decisions. All acquisitions require exploring multiple integration approaches. And yet, Walter replied, these preliminary scenarios were sufficiently developed to include detailed technical specifications and staffing models. They appear quite intentional, Ms. Wilson. James recognized the shifting momentum and attempted to regain control. The Vertex offer represents exceptional shareholder value, a 175% premium over current market price. Regardless of integration details that could be renegotiated, the financial benefit to all shareholders is undeniable. At what cost? I challenged. Short-term financial gain in exchange for destroying a company that has consistently delivered value for decades? That's not a strategy, it's a liquidation. Robert Weiss indicated it was time to move forward. Given the invocation of the founder's integrity clause with verified shareholder support, we will proceed with the special voting provisions it requires. For matters of corporate governance and strategic direction, founding family shares receive triple voting weight. James stood, his posture rigid with barely controlled anger. I formally object to this procedural deviation and reserve all rights to challenge it legally. The Vertex agreement includes timing provisions that make today's approval imperative. Your objection is noted, Robert replied calmly. However, as chairman, I am obligated to follow the corporate charter. The special voting provisions are now in effect. What followed was a procedural battle unlike anything Meridian's boardroom had seen in its 40-year history. James and his allies attempted various parliamentary maneuvers to delay the substantive vote or separate the Vertex acquisition from the leadership questions our coalition had raised. Each attempt was methodically countered by Robert Weiss, whose decades of governance experience proved invaluable. Throughout the increasingly tense exchanges, Ashley remained in constant communication with someone via text, presumably Vertex representatives waiting to hear the outcome. Her composure slipped as the meeting extended into its third hour with no clear resolution, her expression betraying growing anxiety as the acquisition she had helped architect began to crumble. Finally, after legal clarifications and procedural challenges had been exhausted, Robert called for the formal votes. The first matter before the board is the proposed acquisition of Meridian Technologies by Vertex Technologies. A vote against the acquisition requires a simple majority under normal circumstances, but with the founder's integrity clause invoked, the Bennett family trust votes carry triple weight. The vote proceeded methodically around the table. When tabulated, the result was decisive. The acquisition was rejected by a weighted vote of 62% against 38% in favor. James stared at the final tally, his expression unreadable. Ashley's face had drained of color, her phone clutched tightly in her hand. The acquisition proposal is rejected, Robert announced formally. The second matter before the board concerns a vote of confidence in current executive leadership. This vote was requested by the shareholder coalition in conjunction with invoking the founder's integrity clause. This time, James didn't even attempt to object, seeming to recognize the inevitable outcome. The vote of no confidence passed, by similar margins, effectively removing him as CEO, pending appointment of interim leadership. The board has expressed lack of confidence in current executive leadership, Robert stated for the record. As chairman, I call for nominations for interim CEO to guide Meridian through this transition period. Walter Daniels spoke immediately. I nominate Olivia Bennett Hamilton. As William Bennett's granddaughter and a former operations director, she combines the necessary technical knowledge with commitment to the company's founding principles. Timothy Foster seconded the nomination. Mrs. Hamilton has demonstrated remarkable insight into both Meridian's challenges and opportunities. She is the natural choice to lead the company back to its core strengths while navigating modern market realities. James finally broke his silence. This is absurd. Olivia has been effectively absent from operations for 5 years. She lacks the current industry relationships and market understanding necessary for executive leadership. What I lack in recent operational involvement, I responded calmly. I more than compensate for an understanding of what makes Meridian successful. Unlike the current leadership, I've never lost sight of the principles that built this company. The vote for interim CEO proceeded quickly, resulting in my appointment by a decisive margin. In the space of 3 hours, Meridian's trajectory had been completely reoriented. The Vertex acquisition terminated, James removed from leadership, and the company recommitted to its founding vision. As the meeting concluded, board members approached with congratulations, questions, and concerns. Through it all, I watched James and Ashley engaged in intense conversation near the door, their expressions suggesting neither had accepted the outcome as final. Robert joined me as the room gradually emptied. "Congratulations, Olivia. Your grandfather would be proud, not just of the outcome, but of how you achieved it. You built consensus around principles rather than personality. The hard work is just beginning," I acknowledged. "Rebuilding what's been damaged will take time and trust. You've assembled an impressive coalition. Use it wisely." Robert glanced toward James, who was now speaking urgently into his phone. "And watch your back. Corporate defeat rarely ends the battle. It just changes the battlefield." As if to emphasize his point, James approached us, his trademark corporate smile firmly in place despite the circumstances. "Congratulations, Olivia. An impressive tactical victory." His tone carried a warning beneath the professional courtesy. "The board has spoken, and I respect their decision. I'll coordinate with HR regarding transition protocols." "Thank you, James. I'd appreciate a comprehensive briefing on all current initiatives and client relationships as soon as possible." "Of course." His smile never reached his eyes. "Ashley will schedule time tomorrow. I assume she'll be transitioning as well?" The question carried obvious implications about both her professional role and personal relationship with him. I studied Ashley, who stood nearby pretending not to listen, her expression a careful mask of professional neutrality. "Ms. Wilson's future with Meridian will be evaluated like all executive staff," I replied neutrally. "Performance, qualifications, and alignment with company values will determine appropriate roles." James nodded tersely and turned to leave, Ashley falling into step beside him with practiced synchronization. At the door, he paused for one final comment. "The market won't respond well to acquisition termination. Be prepared for significant share price volatility and challenging questions from analysts." "I'm more concerned with Meridian's long-term value creation than short-term market reactions," I replied, a perspective that seems to have been missing from recent leadership decisions. After they departed, Eleanor approached, satisfaction evident in her expression. Phase 1 complete. Now the real work begins. "Starting with damage assessment," I agreed. "How deep does the rot go? Who remains committed to Meridian's principles, and who's been compromised?" "I've already started. Compiling dossiers on current executive staff," she confirmed. "By tomorrow morning, you'll have preliminary assessments of where everyone stands." I squeezed her hand gratefully. "I couldn't have done this without you, Eleanor. Your loyalty to Grandpa's vision made all of this possible." "Bill Bennett gave me opportunities no one else would have offered a female engineer in 1982, she replied simply. "The least I could do was help his granddaughter reclaim his company when it needed her most." As the boardroom cleared, I took a moment alone at the head of the table, the position James had occupied for years and that my grandfather had held for decades before him. The responsibility was momentous, the challenges ahead formidable. But, for the first time in years, Meridian Technologies had leadership committed to its founding purpose. My phone buzzed with a message from Sam. "Security reports James and Ashley still in the building. Executive offices, not packing up. Something's off." I texted back, "Meet me at the executive suite. Bring IT security." The executive floor was eerily quiet when I arrived with Sam and the IT security director. James's office door was closed, but lights visible underneath suggested continued occupancy. "Override the door lock," I instructed the IT specialist. The young woman nodded, using her security credentials to unlock the executive office. I pushed the door open without warning to find James and Ashley hurriedly gathering digital devices while a third person, a man I recognized as Vertex's chief legal officer, collected documents from James's desk. All three froze at our entrance, caught in an act that couldn't possibly be interpreted positively. "What's going on here, James?" I asked, though the scene spoke for itself. Post-vote administrative matters, he replied smoothly. Richard Harmon requested immediate notification of contract termination requirements through his legal counsel, who appears to be removing company documents. I nodded toward the Vertex attorney, who had the grace to look uncomfortable. All acquisition materials are Meridian property and subject to proper documentation protocols. The attorney carefully set down the papers. I was merely reviewing notification requirements for force majeure provisions. In the CEO's office, without board knowledge, immediately following a vote that terminated the acquisition? Sam's tone made clear the implausibility of this explanation. I addressed the Vertex representative directly. As Meridian's interim CEO, I'm instructing you to leave all documents in place and exit the building immediately. Any further communication regarding the terminated acquisition will occur through official channels between respective legal departments. The attorney recognized the compromised position and chose a strategic retreat. Of course, my apologies for any procedural oversight. I turned to the IT specialist. Please secure all electronic devices and documents in this office for forensic review. Nothing leaves without proper chain of custody documentation. You can't just confiscate my personal devices, James objected. This is overreach. Company-issued devices containing company information are subject to review following leadership transition, Sam countered. Standard corporate protocol, as you well know. Ashley's composure finally cracked. This is harassment. We were simply preparing transition materials as requested. By removing documents with Vertex's counsel present? I raised an eyebrow. Let's not insult each other's intelligence, Ms. Wilson. As the IT specialist began documenting and securing devices, I addressed them both directly. Effective immediately, your access to Meridian systems and facilities is suspended pending transition review. Security will escort you from the building once device surrender is complete. You can't possibly run this company, James said quietly, his controlled facade finally slipping to reveal genuine anger. You've been out of the industry for years. The technological landscape has transformed. You're fighting yesterday's battles with outdated weapons. Perhaps, I acknowledged, but I'm fighting for something that never becomes outdated. Integrity, quality, and treating people with respect. The very principles that built Meridian in the first place. Principles don't satisfy shareholders or fend off competitors, he countered. Strange. They did exactly that for the first 30 years of Meridian's existence. Perhaps the problem isn't with the principles, but with leadership that abandoned them for expedient gain. Security arrived to escort them out, a surreal reversal of fortune as James and Ashley surrendered badges and devices before being led from the executive suite. Their expressions as they departed, James coldly furious, Ashley visibly shaken, suggested this confrontation was merely the opening salvo. In a longer conflict, once they were gone, Sam turned to me with a worried expression. We need to move quickly. If they were attempting to remove documents, there's likely digital evidence at risk as well. The next 12 hours passed in a blur of activity as we implemented emergency protocols to protect Meridian's intellectual property, client relationships, and operational continuity. By midnight, we had established basic security controls and began assessing the true state of the company James was leaving behind. The picture that emerged was troubling. Innovations delayed to make the company more attractive for acquisition, employee morale at historic lows, quality control measures systematically weakened to improve short-term margins. As I finally prepared to leave what had been the longest day of my professional life, I noticed a small frame on the credenza behind the desk, a photograph I hadn't seen in years. Grandpa and me standing before Meridian's original building, his arm around my shoulders as we both smiled at the camera. I had no idea how the picture had found its way to this office, but its presence felt like a silent affirmation of the path forward. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.